Hi, Thomas. It is such a delight to have you here and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You are my hero because of the book and article, Why So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders, which is still my favorite HBR article of all time. And I send it to people constantly. But I want to talk about your new book, which is about authenticity. I see this show up in two contexts. The most obvious context is bring your whole self to work. We need to be our authentic selves all the time. That seems to have developed into a quasi religion. And then there's another conversation about brands and companies being authentic. I've seen it argued this week that, in fact, Gen Z want authenticity above even a brand that agrees with them politically. And I hear
Yeah,
that in the classroom all the time. So
yeah.
this concept of authenticity could not be buzzier. And you have written a completely brilliant book ripping it apart. So, for the benefit of people listening, talk to us about your key arguments.
Yeah, and again, thanks for having me. It's great to see you. And I would say, obviously, as a disclaimer, you are more of the expert on the latter point, the consumer and brand side. But of course, we've written on this together, so
Yes, we have.
I've learned a little bit about that side. And really, what's interesting maybe is that there are connections between authenticity at the personal level and at the corporate level. In a way, the first one is that just because a person or a brand slash corporation tells you they're authentic, it doesn't mean they really are. That's like when people tell you they're funny or a good person, maybe they have been able to bullshit themselves to think that, but it doesn't mean that that's true. Also, and following that, we're really better off relying on other views of how authentic a company or a person is than on self reports, which I think you will agree with as well.
Yes.
Then, if you look at the parameters, there's nothing wrong with the idea that is generally, I would say, an acknowledged dimension of authenticity or to authenticity when there is consistency between what you say and what you do, which you have written in your brilliant book, and I have, covered here. So and then perhaps I would also say that it feels good for corporate leaders or individuals to identify with their actions, to see their actions as emblematic of their identity, of their self-concept. So all of that, I think we can agree, are positives. Now, let's get to the dark side or the issues that are problematic. Of course, just because you do what you say doesn't make you a good person at the
Yeah.
individual level. Probably all of the most brutal dictators in history, whether it's Stalin, Hitler, Mao, actually, they were incredibly genuine and transparent with their intentions and executed
It's true.
a bit of an ugly pun here, but executed according to their vision. They also fulfilled some of the other definitions that are usually given for authenticity, which is they were uncompromisingly true to their values, no matter what, even when those were very antisocial values, but they didn't care about what other people thought of them. And at the same time, I think it's hard to know whether they were bringing their whole self to work or not. But, if you read biographies of them and other leaders, I think just because there is consistency between your personal and professional self doesn't make you a good person. So, in a nutshell, the book kind of debunks a lot of the things that are supposed to make authenticity a positive trait or a virtue, and really try to help people understand that at some point, their obligation to others should override their need for self-expression. In other words, especially if you're a powerful leader and you have a lot of status, here
Mhm.
comes the link with the Incompetent Man book. Actually, just because you can doesn't mean you should not give a shit about others and behave as you want. Just because you own your social media platform and you're the richest and most powerful person in the world, to use a hypothetical example, doesn't mean you can belittle others and call them, whatever you want and bully them into thinking. And the fact that people actually celebrate you when you do that, it's a very sad symptom of decline in our society.
You're reminding me of that Jeffrey Pfeffer paper, Why the Arseholes Are Winning,
Yeah.
which is all about the kind of aggrandization of people that already have power. So
Yeah.
definitely can see this is a problem at the top with very
Yeah.
powerful people being allowed to get away with what they need to get away
Yeah.
with no constraints.
Yeah.
This also seems a problem for less powerful people
Yeah.
who are being
Yeah.
told something about how to present and how to show up and how the organization will respond to that that is utter bullshit.
Yeah, I love that, and this gets us to the point that apart from the fact that the kind of the authenticity argument, or as a kind of a moral imperative to guide behavior, isn't very coherent. Also, by the way, because I don't know about you, but I don't know what my real self is. Everything I do is part of me. And, the Beatles checked into an ashram in India and experimented with psychedelics, and they took a while to come out, but maybe they found themselves or not. Some might, hipsters listening to us might go to Costa Rica and experiment with ayahuasca. But, there's no real self. You are the sum of everything you do. But apart from the kind of logical flaws, the issue is really that it's not very authentic. Especially as I argue in the book, authenticity back in the days when diversity and inclusion was still a thing before it was totally killed, especially in the U.S. It was kind of weaponized by the DNI movement with good intention, but some people decided that it was wise to point the finger at people who were part of the out group or diverse individuals, so low status individuals, and told them, don't worry, you can just be yourself. Come to work, bring your whole self, and tell everybody about your LGBT plus weekend, or about your black weekend, or about your unconventional habits, even though you don't fit in. That's great. Sadly, when people do that, they pay a high price in places where there's no inclusion. I always say, if you have to tell people repeatedly that it's safe to be themselves, you can probably assume they don't experience that safety. Equally, research shows that the majority of people are very happy to have some separation between their professional and their personal self. I always say, at least for myself, my whole self isn't even welcomed at home. People
Right.
at home are very happy if I take some parts of it away, and not just for, 9 to 5 or for the week, but forever. So I think what to me was a very interesting paradox when I started researching this book is that we have spent a lot of time pointing the finger at those who don't have much power, telling them that they should just be themselves, and blaming them for not kind of acting in an unfiltered and uncensored way, as if that would actually help them, instead of actually trying to convince the powerful elites that they should stop being themselves, because the reality is that
Right.
authenticity is a privilege for the elite, for the people who are part of the status quo and the vital few. By the way, if you're part of that group, sure, it's safe to be you in an interview, in a sales pitch, at the Christmas party, and in general in your career. But if that privilege only applies to those who resemble or are part of the status quo, then it's not really a very moral, ethical, or beneficial kind of a accolade or approach to working or living. It should be
Yeah,
questioned
and
at least.
this completely tracks with what I hear in the classroom. So one of the anecdotes I had from a student that kind of still stays with me, and this is completely related to the well-intentioned and not very effective, in my opinion, mostly DEI movement, but somebody in my class showed up to an internship at a financial services firm, and the first thing people say is, oh, you're the diversity hire. Or I
Mhm.
hear from women, they're expected to go and reflect the Black experience in some meeting in a way that is a form of unpaid office housework, basically.
Yeah.
So that seems to be a sort of unintended consequence of these very well intentioned efforts. And then, yeah, the lack of division between the personal and professional also tracks with a lot of surveillance, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, something I say all the time is bring your whole self to work. It's only a matter of time before HR's in your home. And
Yeah.
so it
Yes.
also means that we've now got, for example, corporations trying to police what employees say about on social media about Charlie
Yeah.
Kirk, where it doesn't seem like it's going to end well
Yeah.
for anybody.
Yeah. It never ends well. And, I think to bring it maybe down to the level of the mundane, I think one of the uh, comedic, funny, and clever features of shows like The Office, whether it's the very American version or the original British version, which I prefer, but both are equally representative,
Right.
is that, Michael Scott and David Brent can be themselves. And they're in this role of like, they're the comedians, they have no limits, whatever. And they will be a nightmare for HR or for you as a boss in reality. But because it's kind of cathartic to watch it and they're not a real boss, we kind of laugh. The other one is that, this notion, which I know is very close to your heart, that somehow if you're working somewhere that doesn't fully align with your values and doesn't connect to your higher sense of purpose, and maybe the CEO or your boss or somebody makes the wrong comment about what's going on in the Middle East or with climate change or with air traffic controllers or with Trump or whatever, you should immediately quit and join a different cult. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And I
Yeah.
think that's where we need to cultivate or harness a little bit of follower maturity. Barbara Kellerman wrote a lot about this. It's like we spend so much time trying to educate leaders and telling them, oh, corporate advocacy, you should speak up, you should not, whatever. It's always going to be alienating and antagonizing. But I think it would be good to kind of remind employees or followers that work is work. You're supposed to do it to get paid. And for hundreds, if not thousands of years, there was nothing wrong with smiling to your boss and bitching about them when you get home. It worked for generations and millennia, and we should keep it that way. If you think that the alternative or any other kind of seemingly utopian alternative is a possibility, think again. That's not the real world.
Yeah, and I again kind of run into all of this in the classroom, people feeling very disappointed and very upset and having expectations of what their employer should provide that
Yeah.
I don't think are realistic. And so
Yeah.
there's also a supply problem. There just aren't enough employers that are going to even meet these criteria, even if you wanted to. So what's your advice for how somebody that did not, maybe is not our age and did not grow up with this
Yeah.
idea that you go
Yeah.
home and you switch yourself off? How can people reframe and rethink their careers? And how can you show up in a professional way that doesn't cause you enormous psychic harm and allows you
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
make these compromises? Because I feel like a lot
Yeah.
of students I run into are struggling with this.
Yeah, you're right. And you're right that it's a little bit generational, a little bit, where you grow up as well, a little bit of like, I mean, in a way, partly because we have spent so much time in like trying to make work better. And, and sort of like it resulted in first kind of marketing campaign of HR practices, but then the consumerization of work and every, employee
Yeah,
is called talent and everybody's special and everybody has potential. And everybody deserves a coach and everybody should find a true north and a sense of calling, whatever, which is all unrealistic. you a bunch of people are going to be really, most people are going to be very disappointed when they can't cater to that. By the way, the minority that are not disappointed are probably brainwashed and are in a cult. They're not in like a normal working place. But I think to some degree, the antidote or the alternative is to question the common mantras that sort of like underpinned what I call the authenticity cult. So, what if instead of always being true to your values, you learn to entertain that maybe there's a possibility, a small chance that your values are wrong and other people are right? What if you at least learn to tolerate other people's values? I mean, that for sure is going to make it easier, if not possible, for you to work with people who come from different walks of life. Equally, what if instead of saying, don't worry about what people think of you, you actually did worry about how your behavior and your words impact others before you offer your unsolicited opinions on the Middle East, on Gaza, on Trump, on Obama, on climate change? And by the way, is there anything that isn't polarizing today? I think even
right.
you mentioned Charlie Kirk. I mean, but everything is because, we are like so in our little egotistical kind of bubbles, which of course social media and AI kind of fuel. And then equally, what if instead of bringing your whole self or trying to bring your whole self to work, you made an effort to create a professional version of you that is rewarding to deal with and a good corporate citizen? And yes, by all means, identify your friends, your allies, people who are closer to you at work, and maybe you'll make some friends for life. Maybe you'll marry them and maybe not, But what matters is really trying to live a more other oriented life. And again, understanding where the right to be you ends and your obligation to others begins. By the way, often when I say this line to people, like, oh my God, that's horrible. It's like a conformist society, sheep likes it. Because what? Now we're living in like the boom of kind of entrepreneurial spirituality, and we're all kind of radical game changers or change agents. That's what people like some people to think. And that's the worst kind of brainwashing.
Yeah, and I mean this tracks because when I think about during my life when I've been having a really hard time, when I've been bereaved, for example, I've actually enjoyed going to work and kind of focusing on something else. It switches off a part of your brain for several hours. It's soothing. I like having a professional persona. And so
Yeah.
we've lost something really fundamental here. And I think it's so interesting to me that this all tracks with this
Yeah.
rise in corporate surveillance and
Yeah.
overreach and
Oh,
effort
yeah.
to control our personal lives. So there's a corollary here that's very exploitative. And I
Yeah.
don't think it's a coincidence that mission-driven organizations, for example, tend to be exploitative, I think, more than other kinds of organizations.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because the continuation of like always be truthful, to your values and to others, and full, just be honest, even like radical candor, it's like,
Yeah.
okay, sadly, there's no way of knowing, even if I'm being honest or not. I did a podcast the other day, and the last question was like, "Were you authentic?" It's like, how would I know? I'm doing what I can, but the only way to find out would be to have like proper surveillance capitalism. Neuralink, if it could work, would tell
Right.
us, and then it's like it's very Orwellian kind of scenario. What if we stay within the realms of what's possible and feasible, and actually understand some of the other options? First, social psychology shows us that the best way to understand who we are is to internalize how people view you. And what's beautiful about that, I have the David Bowie quote in my book. He said, "I am only the person the greatest number of people think I am," is
Mhm.
that not everybody sees you in the same way.
Right.
There is this thing called self-complexity. If everybody sees you in the same way, you're either very boring, unidimensional, or kind of sort of like almost an automata. But there is this thing that, yeah, your colleagues see a different side of you than your friends, your partner, your family. It's not better or worse, but we have this ability to curate and cultivate or broaden ourselves. And this is the wonderful thing about kind of our professional selves, is that you don't even have to be limited to what you have done in the past or to your present. You know this because you had a rich and varied career, and you started in like a much different place, and then you went here, and now you're here, and maybe tomorrow you go somewhere else. That's a very beautiful kind of demonstrations of the upsides of defying authenticity, which is, by the way, typically is doing what's easy for you, staying in your comfort zone, acting as you always did, or if you're acting in a way that never surprises others, AI can do you. AI can be you. So I think now we have a bigger
Right.
imperative to surprise and invent ourselves or reinvent ourselves more. I'm a huge fan of, Erminia Ibarra's work on this, and she's a great, mentor and friend. And, I love that point in the authenticity paradox. Even like if you think about leaders, the only way leaders can evolve and develop is by not becoming a more exaggerated version of themselves,
Right.
by learning new tricks, even on a simple level. If you're like, oh, I'm an introvert, I hate public speaking, communicate well, you can be you and be that, or try to learn it to the point where it becomes naturally ingrained and part of your identity. And equally, if you are speaking all the time and mansplaining, as I'm doing right now, and never listening, you can't just be you, or you can learn to be someone better. Shut up and listen.
I mean, this is personally resonates. I spend my life in the classroom. I
Yeah,
talk for 12 hours a week. I
yeah,
used to get so nervous public speaking, I would shake
yeah,
and have to take beta blockers. So
yeah.
people are always amazed to hear this, but I've trained myself out of that. If I'd been authentic to myself, I'd still be cowering somewhere. So
Yeah.
it's a wonderful
Well,
example.
you mentioned beta blockers, which have come up this week in various conversations with various friends, and most of them are in America. And of course, it's interesting that the culture and society that is so obsessed with authenticity is also self-medicating to,
Like crazy.
change how we feel and how we act, because I think we're not even comfortable with who we are, and then there we are, kind of trumpeting or worshiping authenticity.
Yeah, and I mean the rise of psychedelics seems related here as well because that's seen as some kind of pathway into
Escapism.
a deeper and more authentic self. So
Yeah.
you love to bust up cliches. Talk to us about the reception to this book. What kind of pushback have you had? What have been the most insightful conversations for you?
Yeah, and first on that kind of busting, I don't think like that's like my goal in itself to bust up cliches, but I do get like maybe I'm like just overly rational and I cannot sleep when these ideas keep me up at night when I see that it might that concepts or idea may have started as a well-meaning and logical and rational kind of a thought, but they become so big and so diluted that the mainstream view is so irrational that both science, data, and common sense become controversial. I like to then push and try to bring that kind of to the main stage. The reception is has been unique, I would say. So there's a lot of people who are like, finally somebody is debunking authenticity, which was BS, and I've known it, which is great, but then you're preaching
Yeah,
to the choir. There are, of course, a lot of people who are like, this guy is crazy. Really? Don't be you. Don't be yourself. It's like, come on, what's next? Like I say this in the book, one of the reviewers say, okay, what's the next book going to be? Bringing down Taylor Swift. As if you couldn't do that, right? Because
maybe.
so equated, yes, that's not a bad idea. But what's been interesting, Alison, is that for the first time, I'm seeing people who have told me, I thought it would be total clickbaity bullshit and you're crazy. But actually, you have a point. And I
Right.
love that. Even if it's like 5 or 10% of the readers, I do love people who maybe have an open mind to begin with, but who are at least persuadable and engaged with the arguments. And so far, that's been the most enjoyable or kind of a fulfilling part, I think, of the feedback.
Yeah, and for anybody listening, if you are skeptical about these arguments, buy and read the book. It is very convincing, very well structured, very well written, and I think you will certainly have your views changed.
Yeah.
One thing I think you're working on as well is AI, which I
Yeah.
hesitate to raise because it's
Yeah.
everywhere, but how this
Yeah.
will work in organizations. It seems to be a big thread of your work right now. Tell us what your thinking is on this topic. It's obviously generating an enormous
Yeah.
volume of noise right now.
Yeah.
What is your most sensible advice?
And I must confess, I'm having a little bit of AI fatigue myself and saturation because the book I Human, which is the previous one, AI automation and the quest to reclaim what makes us unique, came up in 2023 when ChatGPT was launched. That means, as you know, I had been working on it for 2 or 3 years, so I was really, really fully immersed in that. Then I spent 2 years just talking about that and promoting that. And now AI is absolutely everywhere.
Yeah,
One of the most interesting things I did recently is I was in a panel with the Vatican's chief AI advisor, and it was us to answer questions. I had the bad idea, maybe, to make an analogy that AI is like God. It's everywhere but nowhere. It suffers a little bit from an adoption crisis. People question the ROI, but it just doesn't go away. And we're hoping that it will solve all of our problems. Nobody laughed, and the guy looked at me like, "Are you actually crazy?" It was in the Vatican, right? Now, so I think that on the upside, we might be so smart as a species that we have managed to invent something that does all the thinking for us, all the creating for us. And I think it's a little bit now human thought, creativity, and intellect is a little bit like the diamond industry. There's just no way to know what's synthetic and what's natural, and it's only so long that you can persuade people to pay a lot of more money for something that looks exactly the same as like microwaved ideas, right? Um, I am worried that in the short term it will have disruptive and negative effects in the job market. We're seeing it. The same people that were saying, "Oh no, no, it will change how you work, not your job. You're not going to be automated. You're going to be augmented, and it's going to automate tasks within jobs, not jobs altogether." Not true.
right.
I also fear of going into a stage in our life and humanity where we can actually be without thinking. Because if this makes thinking extinct, a little bit like now we have to do Pilates because we're sitting on a chair all the time and eating fat, sugary food. Our
Right.
hunter-gatherer ancestors were eating raw fish and, all the time active. Maybe we need to invent the equivalent for the mind. Like maybe in the future we'll have like Pilates for the mind or intellectual retreats where we just go and think because we don't do it anymore. On the upside, I think, it's exposing a lot of the what I call the BS economy. David Graeber's book, Bullshit Jobs, a theory is really, really wonderful. If you extrapolate that, as it turns out, you know, if people are excited because they can do 500 PowerPoint presentations and send their avatars or digital clones to meetings, and your AI replies to my AI email, there's a lot of tasks that are just bullshit. Same in education, right? If kids or students can write their essays with AI and professors can grade them with AI, we're going to save a lot of time. But we need to figure out what we're going to do with the time we save. And that's where I still haven't seen, much reason for optimism. I still have faith in human creativity and ingenuity, but that's the ask. AI is doing its job and is amazing, even if it doesn't evolve more. And then, of course, if you give a powerful tool to an idiot, that doesn't end up very well.
Yeah, I was in a conversation with someone earlier this week who's running some kind of AI ethics effort for one of the big four accounting firms, arguing that my students will be supervising all these bots and getting this done and providing the critical thinking and et cetera, et cetera. And my
Just like
observation is
that.
they can't sit still for 75 minutes in my class without a screen. How we're expecting them to sit back and reflect, that just doesn't seem like it's going to
Yeah.
end well.
And maybe, just maybe, it's just like Wi-Fi or the internet or social media. It will be incredibly impactful. It already is, to the point that we won't even be able to imagine a world where we didn't have it. When your phone battery dies and you don't have it, you're like, oh, that's so liberating. You're an absolute moron. You can't function. You can't do anything at all. You don't know how to walk 3 blocks, etc. Maybe it will be that, in that it's ubiquitous, unavoidable. As some people have predicted, it will make some people very rich and some companies even more powerful and richer. But will it make us, I'm a big Radiohead fan, and will it make us happier, fitter, more productive? I doubt, as the OK Computer song said. So I think we can try to optimize or plan for that or against that. Right now, we are all too distracted by what the tool can do and how it might upgrade itself, and we're not thinking hard enough on how about how we need to upgrade or improve ourselves.
Right. And to bring these two threads together, it does
There you
seem
go.
that CEOs are backing heavily off this idea that you should be authentic and we're going to include you and we're going to give you opportunities, and are back to layoffs and treating people like automatons. So all of this is
Yeah.
kind of fueling a reckoning that makes being your whole self and bringing your whole self to work more dangerous than ever, right?
Yeah, and there's another kind of parallel or kind of thread that connects both books and both topics, AI and authenticity, which is, in a way, the more authentic you are, the more predictable you are, because others feel like, oh, okay, I know what you're going to say, etc., and there's no surprise. And people are already quite predictable to begin with as a baseline, but in a way, the more predictable your work is, the more it can be standardized, the more it can be automated, and more less relevant you are. So, it doesn't matter so much what skills you have or what degree you have, but you do have to have a certain entrepreneurial mindset or ability to reinvent yourself and to create, and there's this kind of a trap that AI presents, which is the more you use it, the more productive you are, but also the more vulnerable or susceptible to automation you are. Because if
Mhm.
what you do is like done by a tool, what are you actually adding? What's the value that you're bringing there? And so again, at the corporate level, I think some leaders are truly trying to augment their talent and have that. But the easiest thing to do right now is to cut costs and to say, well, if people are achieving the same with less input, they're being more productive in the sense of doing the same with less. I don't need that many. Who goes? Usually the more junior entry level jobs go first. Ironically, those are the people or the employees more likely to teach older, more senior people how to
Right.
use AI and how to change. Um, So I don't know, but to tell you the truth, having been really, really, most of my speaking, coaching, and even a lot of the writing is on this today. I'm still sitting on the fence about, will it be as disruptive and revolutionary? Will it be the fourth or fifth industrial revolution, as some people say? Maybe not. Is it totally overhyped and is rubbish? Probably not. Financially, we're seeing worrying signs of, a market that is so dependent on
Yeah.
this and it hasn't delivered yet, that I do worry about. As some economists have said, the bubble might be too big to pop, too big to burst, but we might see a deflation similar to what happened, in previous kind of technological revolutions.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember 2000.
There you go.
It does
And
feel
and
like that
yet
right
and
now.
yet we still went from dial-up to Wi-Fi, and then from Wi-Fi to
Exactly.
social media, and from now, like, digital detox and all that, and all the other kind of things that are very, very hard to kind of handle or implement.
Absolutely. Thomas, it was wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so, so, so much for your time, and hope to have you back soon. So thank you very much.
Always happy to be here, and thanks again for the invite.
Fantastic.